Hey guys, welcome back to Woody's Workshop. Today I'm going to be showing you how to remove and install a transmission in a 2017 and up F350. It's a pretty big job, so let's get right into it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to need to do is disconnect both batteries on the truck. We need to do this because we're removing the starter in order to access all the bolts on the flywheel. Okay, so you're going to want to remove the passenger front wheel because we're going to have to remove the oil filter adapter, which is right there, in order to drop the starter motor out from the bottom. Okay, so I removed the oil filter adapter from the passenger side of the upper oil pan. There are 4 8mm bolts, 1, 2, 3 right there, and 4 in that bottom right corner. And this top right bolt is actually a 10mm, and then it has a stud with a 10mm nut on the end of it that holds on this bracket right up here, right there, which is your starter motor wiring harness. Okay, so here is a look at the starter motor from the top above the frame rail on the passenger side. You have 2 13mm bolts holding on the starter motor, one right there, one right there, and then you have one more on the bottom. Let's see if I can. You have one more right there. And those are the 3 13s that hold the starter in. Here's the starter motor removed from the truck. Here's a 13mm bolt that goes through the bell housing into the starter motor. Here's another 13, and here's the 13 that sits up against the block. You also have this plastic protecting cap you have to pop off. There's a 15mm nut on the power cable, and there's a 10mm nut on the signal wire. Once you remove these 3 bolts, take your cables off, the starter motor comes right out of the bottom with the oil filter adapter removed. Once the starter is removed, there's this plastic access cover that has to be pried out in order to access the nuts of the flex plate. Okay, so now that the starter motor is out of the way and we've removed the access panel, we're going to come to the front of the truck and remove this 16mm bolt in order to swing out your steering stabilizer shock so you can gain access to your crankshaft pulley. You're going to need a 12-point 18mm socket to turn your crankshaft in order to remove the nuts off of the flex plate. Okay, so here's a shot of one of the 15mm nuts on the flex plate. There's 6 of them in total. You'll have to rotate the crankshaft and release them one by one. Okay, so now we're on the driver's side of the transmission. We have the electrical connector here. You have to turn it counterclockwise and disconnect it, just like that. We're going to need to disconnect the shifter linkage. There's 2 13mm bolts, one right here and one right here, and then you can pull the linkage to the side. Okay, so now we need to remove the front drive shaft. I've wedged a pry bar through the front U-joint to prevent the drive shaft from turning. There are 4 12.12mm bolts holding the drive shaft in place. Okay, so I've got the front drive shaft disconnected. I've got the rear drive shaft disconnected. I went ahead and pulled the transmission cross member that goes from here to the transmission mount and then over to the other frame rail. There was 2 18mm bolts on each side and then 2 21mm nuts on the transmission mount. I also disconnected the transmission cooler lines, and that black line right there is the dipstick tube that you have to pull out of the transmission. So with all that removed, I've got a jack underneath the transfer case supporting the weight of the transmission, since I have already removed the cross brace. So at this point, all that's left is just to remove the bell housing bolts and lower it down. I got a late start today, so I'll probably get going on this first thing in the morning. Hey, what's going on, guys? It's the next day. I'm down here under the truck. All that's left is just the bell housing bolts. There are 4 13 millimeters on the bottom half, and then there's 6 across the top, including the 2 we've already removed for the starter motor. Once those are out, we can go ahead and lower the transmission. Here's a look at my setup. I've got a floor jack underneath the transfer case, and I've got a transmission jack underneath the transmission pan with a little piece of packaging foam underneath the pan. I've also got 2 ratchet straps around the transmission. I am by myself, so just a little bit of added security. This is a very big transmission and weighs a ton. So just a little bit of extra security there. All right, there it is, dropped out. And it is pretty big. Definitely want to take your time when you're doing this, especially if you're by yourself. You're gonna need to take your time and be patient, because this is very heavy. This isn't something that you would want to drop. There's the transmission lowered out of the truck. Now you can proceed to go ahead and do whatever repairs you need to do, whether it's transmission replacement or if you're doing the upper oil pan gasket like I'm doing here. It is a pretty technical job to get that transmission out. You do need some special tools. And like I was saying earlier, it's extremely heavy, so if you're going to try to tackle this on your own by yourself, just take the extra precautions to be safe and don't rush it. Take your time. Thank you for watching today's video. I hope you found it helpful. If you're new to the channel and you like the content, please consider subscribing. I've got quite a few projects planned for the near future. Now that I have the transmission removed, I'm going to be uploading a video probably next week of removing and resealing the upper oil pan gasket. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, or maybe you're trying to tackle that job yourself, stick around and I'll see you next time.